with sloop bores, your effective range is really 1 to 300 yards. So you want to get everybody together to deliver maximum lead down on your target. The picture presently is a rest. You're standing in formation, waiting on the officers to figure out what's going on.
This is the old carriage-drawn horse highway, US 1. Amazingly narrow. You could barely get 2 cars through here side by side now. Look at the size of this 100-year-old cactus. This is straight above me. Gigantic. Huge. 100-year-old cactus.
Primer is no containing brass cartridge like we have today. So the primer would have gone right here on the cone, and then when you pull the trigger, it would come down, explode the cap, and discharging the weapon. So that's what these are for, that's your primer. Back here we have to carry the ammunition. This is the cartridge box. It holds 40 rounds of ammunition, but it's fully loaded with lead and powder. It's about 10 pounds. And they would have carried an extra 40 in the box and another maybe 20 or 30 in their pockets in arsenal packs, which was about 10 rounds per pack. Another part of the fatigue uniform, getting into the everyday life of the soldier, is the most important thing of any era, your canteen, especially out in California. During the 1860s, California was in the middle of what was known at the time as the worst drought in California history. It was about 2 or 3 years long, and it destroyed the cattle industry, it destroyed the farming industry. There was just no water across the state. This was extremely important. Was the canteen. Next he's got, this way, this is the haversack. This is where all your food went. We were issued, when we were on the march, we were issued 3 days rations, which were salt beef, coffee, and either fresh bread or something called hardtack or iron crackers, which is just salt water flour baked into a solid brick that'll break your teeth. And they were, 3 days was common. 3 days rations was common. Sometimes it'd be more, sometimes it'd be less, just depending on where you had to go. Sometimes they would. They also had, each regiment or each company had a baggage wagon that would carry extra rations. But because the wagons were a lot slower than what the infantry could march, they would always maintain, what they would do is they would maintain their 3 rations in their haversack, and then they would halt for the night, and then the baggage wagons would catch up, they'd resupply, and then take off again. And that's how they were able to make about 18, a good soldier was expected to march about 20 miles a day. The Company H coming up here from Los Angeles, they were doing about 18 miles a day. I forget exactly how many days they made it without stopping. But that was 3 days ration, which was usually kind of the standard holdover of how much food they were expected to carry at any given time. And then when they halted, then this would sit empty and they'd just be issued directly out of the wagon, basically became a chuck wagon at that time. And then they'd go off and pick up themselves. And then once they came to a specific halting point, then they would go out into the community and they would pick up rations, buy supplies from some of the local stores and stuff to kind of supplement the ration. Because the one thing that's missing in an army ration is vegetables. So if you go too long on a salt diet, you're going to get scurvy. Basically, joints will cramp up, teeth swell up.
I saw onions in one of your packs.
Yeah, that would have been a local acquisition. The government's always been the government. They don't like to spend money, and vegetables is not on the list. Moving on, this is the knapsack, which is like those backpacks that are loaded with extra gear, extra clothing, extra shirts, extra socks, extra underwear. The California Volunteers were unique because they were expected to carry everything, which means both these style uniforms. So you would have this, and then carrying this jacket with all your extra doodads for parade up inside this thing. The average pack would weigh about 50 pounds, and you're expected to pack it. You also issued one wool blanket. That's all you got. Back east, they were also issued tents and something called a ground cloth, which was made of, at the time, it was Goodyear rubber. And that was kind of protected from the elements. Out here, we weren't as important, so all that stayed back east. All you got was just your blanket. And then the tent over on the other end of the park was carried by the baggage wagons, and about 10 to 20 guys would stay in those. And that's what they would live in if they weren't out under the stars. Another thing too that was a little different was just the work cap. This called the torch cap. It was intended to be kind of just utilitarian, beat it up. This is just the get dirty uniform. Now, when you weren't working or you weren't marching somewhere, then this was the uniform that you were expected to be wearing. This is the full dress uniform, and it's just for show. This is the dress hat. This was adopted in the 1850s. And the big influence of the U.S. Army at the time, from the Revolutionary War all the way to about the Spanish-American War, the biggest European fashion is what the U.S. Army emulated. So at this time, it was the French uniform, and the French and the Italians. So this is based off of the Italian Garibaldi hat, which was during their the Garibaldi Revolution. It was really popular. The blue was just American in general, but the frock coat was based off the French frock coat. This was really the first truly American uniform that they developed, just because this cost too much to tear up. So they decided, you know what, we need a workhorse uniform, and this is originally an outdated civilian style called the sack coat. And the civilians at the time of the Civil War were considering it was already out of fashion. It was kind of ugly. And the Army's like, well, it's cheap.
It's just to go fight in.
It doesn't cost much if you destroy it, we'll just replace it real quick. So they adopted this uniform. The forage cap is kind of a holdover from just after the Mexican-American War, when they were out fighting the Mormons in Utah. They had what were called shakos, which were also based off the French. It was just this really tall, you can kind of still see the style. It was a really tall hat that was stiff, kind of odd to wear. When they were in Utah, they figured out that if you dunk it in the water, squish it, it's a lot more comfortable to wear. The Army caught on just before the Civil War and said, that's a great idea.
Mm-hmm.
So all it is, they just kept making the shako, but taking the stuffing out of it. This also later on kind of morphed into its own style, especially back east. You take this pin out, and it becomes a wide brim hat, which is a lot better to wear in the summer than that thing. And back east, that was more popular to wear kind of just unadorned. But California being the flashy styles that they've always been,
They got to have the feather.
you have to have the bling. The shoulders, these are called shoulder scales. These also, they serve a kind of three purposes. By the Civil War, it was a dual purpose only. When these first came out, they were intended as kind of armor in a sense, because infantry up until the Civil War was always expecting you're going to go against cavalry.
Right, and they're going to have a knife or a sword coming down at you.
The idea was when someone came over you with a sword, you could kind of just duck it, it would hit this and glance off.
Right.
Heavy cavalry sabers that came out later, this is brass. Steel versus brass is not going to work.
Right.
So that kind of idea slipped away, but they still liked the look. Again, the French were still using them. America at the time loved the French. So they said, oh, we want to keep these, it looks good. So then it became strictly for parade, for flash, but it also denotes rank. So I'm a sergeant. I'm the highest ranking NCO or highest ranking enlisted man in the company right now. So my shoulder scales are going to be a lot larger than what he would have. So if you're wearing something, if you're not wearing your dress code, or if you've just been promoted, this is what you would look at. This is your rank, along with stripes. Depending on how wide your stripe is, this is your rank. He's a private. He's not worth the
No
money.
stripes.
He doesn't get anything right. Sergeant. So from sergeant all the way up to sergeant major, which is the top sergeant in the military, they would have the wide stripe. Corporals, which is kind of just above privates, they'll have a half-inch stripe. That's the basic of the uniform. It would eventually change. This uniform started from 1858 to about 1875 when France lost popularity in Europe, and then it became the Prussians, the Germans. And so they completely revamped the uniform to look like the Prussian. They had the little spiked hat and everything. And then they went to war with Spain, and the fighting in Cuba, all these uniforms were absolutely useless in the new wars that they were fighting overseas. And that's when you started really seeing the modern American uniform. The khaki started coming out because it didn't hold as much heat. Cotton was more common. The big campaign hats that you see now that the Marine Corps wears, that was invented right after this. So this was kind of this uniform, and the one just after was really the last European influences that the U.S. military adopted before really coming into their own. These were also kind of a holdover of the European armies. These are both the model 1861 Springfield rifle. It was the workhorse, and it was, at the time, it was the best weapon in the world. It really wasn't that much different from the other European weapons. Still the same loading system. The only difference was that it was manufactured here in the United States, that the steel was a little bit better. By the time of the Civil War, a lot of hand-to-hand combat had ceased to exist. These things are effective up to about 1,000 yards, and it's a large 58 caliber lead slug with the stopping power of a freight train. That if you get hit in the arm's coming off, no matter what. So hand-to-hand combat really wasn't common, but if it did happen, they still were required to carry the bayonet. And a lot of these were imported from Austria, where they had theoretically the best bayonets in the world. Go figure. They're cheap and they would bend immediately. So these were considered inhumane at the time. The Civil War was still considered a medical tool. You just wouldn't go up and try and be that. Yeah, you're fighting each other and trying to kill each other, but you don't want to be cruel. The idea with the three-sided bayonet is when you stab, it's got three sides. So when you go in, you'll twist, and the end of these will bend just slightly to create a hook. So it's just like spaghetti. That was not popular. There was only really 3 major hand-to-hand fights of the War of Gettysburg, Petersburg, and a couple other fights. But for the most part, this was usually used to put your steak meat on, or stuck it in the ground. It was candle holder. Most of the equipment that we're wearing is all modern reproductions based off of museum artifacts. Except this thing is actually an original. This is over 150 years old. And that's the basic uniform. Any questions?
Cents for a beer, 25 cents for a whiskey.
Old style saloon. I don't know why you would have an axe on the table, but don't cheat it.
Chop off the person's hand who's cheating.
Don't cheat at cards around here, I guess.
Over in the other room.
That's
This
nice
is the Wells
little
Fargo's office.
Wells Fargo office, huh? There's a mammoth tusk laying on the table.
Pleistocene Ice Age. That's what we studied yesterday at the tar pits.
Just gave us 3 beautiful windows on the other side of the
Yes,
corner
oh, and
there.
everywhere else,
We're going to see they're really pretty.
you
Yeah, well, The two older girls, they want to. And so they just went, no, you're not. So Susan and Bobby, they corralled 10 of them, and they gave us 3. And I went 2, they split it.
Schoolroom. And another awesome stove. Huh.
Play with a girl, you get 4 lashes.
Look at that. The rules of the school.
Now look at this. Right below it. Rules for teachers. You will not marry during the term of your contract. You will not keep company with men.
Chamber pot. The chamber pot. The way you used to have to go to the bathroom in the middle of the night, you didn't have to go all the way out to the outhouse. That's a cool chandelier. That would have been run off of oil.
Oh.
Another cool old oil lamp changed to electric. Oh yeah. Another chamber pot. Close. Oddfellows. Memorabilia.